Hi guys, Mimi G here. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing a sew along to one of my new simplicity patterns, 3064. Let's get started. All right guys, so we're working on my simplicity 3064 and I went ahead and cut the long version, but obviously if you want to make the short version, just cut along the cut line on the pattern piece. The sewing is exactly the same. I did want to point out before we go over the pattern pieces that on the inside you'll also find our finished garment measurements. So the reason I wanted to point out the finished garment measurements is because I wanted to show you guys how I select the size that I'm going to cut and sew based on the finished garment measurements. So I measured myself this morning and my bust is a 36, my waist is a 28, and my hip is a 39. So let's go one by one. So the finished bust on here, I fall exactly at a 14. My waist is a 28, so it actually has me between a 12 and a 14. And then my hip is a 39, which actually would put me between a 14 and a 16. So I'm falling in between all three sizes. Now this is a knit dress. It is meant to snatch on your body, okay? It's going to snatch. So I always go down sometimes 2 sizes when I'm working with a knit garment that is fitted to the body, right? A bodycon dress. And so for me, I know that my fabric has a significant amount of stretch. So what I'm going to do is, because I fall on the 14 for the 36 at my bust, I'm going to go down to a 12. I'm going to cut the size 12 because although my waist falls between the 12 and the 14, it's literally like just that much, okay? And I want it to be snatched. So we're working with negative ease, right? We want negative ease in this garment. So again, I could fall here. It's a 1/2 inch difference. I might actually have to take in a bit more. I could technically cut the 10 because I know that this is going to stretch across my body because of the amount of stretch that is in my fabric. If you're using a knit fabric that doesn't have a significant amount of stretch, then you might just want to go down 1 size. Now, my hip does fall between the 14 and the 16, but again, I need it to be snatched to the gods. And I want it to fit nice and snug around my hip area. So I could go down to a 36 because for me, that's only going to be maybe 2 inch difference. And that for me is fine with negative ease. So I'm going to be cutting out and using the size 12. Okay, let me also point out that always on the back of your pattern envelope, you are going to have a list of suggested fabrics. If you are new to sewing, if you do not know fabrics that well, I would suggest that you always try to stick to what is suggested on the pattern envelope to make your life easier. If you sort of veer away from this list and are working with something that isn't compatible to the pattern, how it's supposed to fit or drape, then you might experience some issues with the fit not looking or feeling the way that you want. So again, if you're new to sewing, I would stick right here to this suggested fabrics area. We're also going to need some notions. So you're going to need a 1/4 inch elastic, at least 1 and 1/8 of a yard. And then you're going to also need some power mesh for your lining. So this has a built-in shelf bra that we're going to be stitching on. So you're going to need, now technically you could use the same fabric, right? Like if you have a thin enough knit, you can just use the same fabric for your lining for the shelf bra. But I do have some power mesh in my stash, so that's what I'm going to use. But I want to point out 2 things. So here are 2 different types of mesh. Now, one is very thin. You can almost see my hand completely through it. And it's really not meant to like suck you in, okay? Like this is really light, it's really thin, it's super stretchy. And so if you need more support, then you're gonna wanna get a mesh that is more like this, right? This is more of a power mesh. And you can see that you can sort of still see my hand, but it's definitely not as sheer as this one here. And this, if I pull, has a lot, like I have to pull to get it to stretch more, right? So this definitely is going to give you more compression than if you were to use this. Now, I don't need a lot of compression, so I'm going to be using the lighter weight one, but I did want to point out that power mesh does come in different weights and with different compressions. So make sure that if you need a little more support for that shelf bra, that you're buying a power mesh that is a little thicker and has a bit more compression. Okay, let's go over the pattern pieces we're gonna cut. So you have your front, which is cut on the fold, and you're going to cut one. I did want to point out that when you're cutting your pattern piece out, you're going to see a pattern piece that says 1, and you're going to see a pattern piece that says 1A. This is your extension. Okay, that means that the length of the pattern didn't fit onto the paper, and so we needed to give you this additional piece to match up, and you have these little dots here. You're just going to align the dots so that they're sitting right on top of each other, and you're going to tape that to complete the pattern piece. Then you have pattern piece number 2. This is the back. You are going to cut 2. We do have a center back seam that allows for better fit along the back of the body. And you also have 2A, which is the extension. Now, I will point out that if you're doing the short version, then this 2A and 1A does not apply to you because you will be cutting here along the cut here for view A. Then we have our back facing, right? So you're going to be cutting 2 out of your lining or your power mesh. And then we have a pattern piece number 3, which is the front of your lining or shelf bra, and you're going to cut 1 on the fold. We have pattern piece number 7. This is our back binding. You're going to cut 1. We have pattern piece number 8. This is our armhole binding, and you're going to cut 2. Make sure that you transfer all of your dots and markings. We have pattern piece number 6. This is our front binding. You're going to cut 1. And then you have pattern piece number 5, which is just a guide for your elastic. So you don't cut this out of fabric. You use it to cut the length of elastic that you're going to need for your shelf bra. I am going to point out that I do not have 1/4 inch elastic in my stash. I don't know why, but I did not. So I'm going to be using a wider elastic. So my casing for my shelf bra is going to be wider. I just wanted to point that out so when we get to that, you're wondering like, why are you using wider elastic? This is why. This is what I have. And I like that the color is sort of nude, so it's going to match my power mesh lining. But if you have 1/4 inch elastic, then you're going to use the exact seam allowance that's given. And I'll mention that when we get to this part. I'm also going to be using my jersey ballpoint needles. I'm not going to be using a zigzag stitch for this. I don't have any horizontal seams that I have to be really worried about. So I'm just going to be using my regular straight stitch. Plus I also serge my seam allowances, so I don't have to really worry about any of that. But up to you, you could do whatever you want. I'm going to be using the jersey ballpoint needles because I did test my fabric before I start sewing, and I wanted to make sure that the needle and the fabric worked well together. So you can also use what is called stretch needles. So you'll sometimes see it as jersey, sometimes you'll see it as stretch. Just test your needle with your fabric before you get started. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to stitch together our center back seam. So with right sides facing, we're going to go ahead and pin along the center back. Okay, we're going to head to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, now that we have our center back seam sewn, I did go ahead and serge my seam allowance. You can go ahead and press your seam allowance to one side, and we're going to go ahead and grab our front. All right, let's go ahead and lay front to back, right sides facing. We're going to go ahead and pin our side seams together. Okay, now go ahead and pin your other side seam the same way, and then we're going to head to the sewing machine and starting at the hem, working our way up, we're going to stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, guys, so we have sewn together our side seams. This is where you stop to fit as you go, okay? What you're gonna do is you're gonna put on whatever undergarments you plan on wearing with this, and you're gonna put this on, and you're going to see if you need to take it in more or if you need to let it out. That really depends, obviously, on the fit that you prefer for the dress. So you would try it on, see whatever adjustments you need to make. If you need to take it in more at the side seams, then you would do that before we move on to the next step. All right, so I went ahead and made adjustments to mine. I did have to take it in a bit. I want to remind you that if you do that to your dress, you will also need to make that same adjustment to your lining pieces. So however much you removed from your side seams, you will need to do the same thing for your shelf bra. You will also need to do that for your band. So depending on how much you took from your side seams, you'll want to remove some of that also from the armhole bands, because we made the side seam smaller, so your arm bands are going to be a little bigger. So I have removed it from my bands. I also removed it from my shelf bra. Now you're going to go ahead and do your shelf bra the same way that you did your dress. Okay, so with right sides together. This doesn't really have a right side. You're going to go ahead and pin your center back. You're going to stitch it again using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then you're going to lay front to back, and you're going to sew your side seams again the same way that we did for the dress. Okay, so you should have your shelf bra sewn. Again, it was just the way we did the dress, right? Center back, then side seams. And I went ahead and serged along the bottom. Now remember that I mentioned early on in the video that I'm gonna need to take a bigger casing because of the size elastic I had available here. But if you are using a 1/4 inch elastic, then you're gonna turn in that 1/2 inch. I'm gonna turn in 5/8 of an inch because I have 1/2 inch wide elastic. Pressing mesh is a little, finicky because it's not really gonna crease or anything. It's not gonna stay. So you can give yourself a stitching guide, right? That's usually what I do. If you guys watch my videos, you know I give myself a stitching guide. And then we're gonna go ahead and turn under that amount, and we're gonna go ahead and do a casing. We're also gonna leave an opening at the center back so that we can insert our elastic. Now, because this is a horizontal stretch, right? When you put it on your body, it's stretching this way. I am gonna do my casing using a very narrow zigzag stitch so that my mesh can stretch. Okay, you're gonna cut your elastic according to the pattern piece that was given to you, and now we're gonna go ahead and insert it through our opening. Keep your eye on your elastic so you don't lose it inside your casing. Okay, I'm gonna hold my elastic together. I wanna make sure that it did not twist. Okay, now I'm just gonna go ahead and grab my elastic. You're gonna overlap it by a 1/2 inch, and you're going to stitch them together. Okay, once you have inserted your elastic, overlapped it, and stitched it, you can go ahead and close out your opening. All right, go ahead and grab your dress, and with your dress right side out. All right, so with your dress right side out and your shelf bra wrong side out, you're just gonna go ahead and put it to the inside. So wrong sides should be facing each other. And I'm gonna just line up my side seams, my center back seam, and then pin all the way around. Okay, I want you to head to your sewing machine, and you're just gonna baste these together, okay? So what you're gonna do is, using a very, very narrow zigzag stitch, you're just gonna go ahead and baste both of these together to secure your shelf bra in place. All right, let's go ahead and attach our binding to the back. So I have pressed 3/8 of an inch along the lower edge, and we're gonna go ahead and place it right side facing wrong side, okay? Because when we turn this over, we want to be able to top stitch on the right side because it's much easier. So I'm gonna go ahead and pin. And you will need to stretch this a bit to fit. Okay. Okay, we're going to head to the sewing machine, and using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, we're going to go ahead and stitch this in place. While at the machine, you will see me turn this over along that pressed edge and top stitch. So just follow along with me. Okay, so this is what your right side should look like, and this is what it should look like on the inside. You're gonna go ahead and do the same exact thing for the front. So let's go ahead and grab our binding. Again, working on the wrong side, and with the right side of your binding facing the wrong side, we're gonna pin, and you're just gonna repeat that process. Okay, head to your sewing machine. Again, 3/8 of an inch, turn it over and top stitch. All right, guys, so I forgot to film this part. So these are your the bands, right, for your armhole. I went ahead and stitched them together using 5/8 of an inch, and then I just trimmed off some of that seam allowance. So you're gonna do that for both the armbands. Now we're gonna go ahead and, again, with right side of the binding facing the wrong side of the dress, we're gonna go ahead and pin. Now you should have some dots that you transferred, okay? So you're gonna match up the dot, the shorter dot, right, goes to the front. So I'm gonna go ahead and pin there. And then I might just pin again, maybe here in the center. Okay, and now I'm gonna go ahead and pin that other dot. So I'm gonna find my dot, there we go. And I'm gonna pin it to the back. And then I'm gonna pin along here, maybe once or twice. And you're gonna be stretching slightly as you sew. Now you might find it helpful, again, if you turn and press that 3/8 of an inch, because when we turn it over, we're gonna be doing this same exact thing. It gets a little trickier around this area here, right? Because it's not attached to anything, so we'll actually be closing this. But I find it easier for me to fold and do it as I go. So I'm gonna go ahead and stitch from the back to the front, and we're gonna be using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, so this is what it should look like right now. So I need to avoid as much bulk as I can. So I'm gonna go ahead and just trim a little bit there, and then trim a little bit here. Okay, now we're gonna go ahead and pin this all the way around, same as we did before. Okay, now on this little part here, we're just gonna pin the binding to itself. I'm I'm gonna go ahead and trim this little corner. All right, guys, we're gonna go ahead and stitch all the way around along the edge. Okay, so now we have one side done. You're going to do the exact same thing for the other side. All right, guys, we have finished the top. The only thing left for us to do is to finish the hem of the dress. This would be a good time to slip it on, try it on, see if you like the length. If you need to take in a little more, or let's say it's too long and you want to shorten it, you would do that now if you had to. I'm only taking 5/8 of an inch hem allowance for myself after trying it on. I don't want it to be too short, and I did end up having to shorten this pattern before I even started sewing it, just because I know that I'm short. So I gave myself a stitching line. You guys know I do this. I talk about it all the time. So I gave myself a stitching line at 5/8 of an inch using a really long basting stitch, because normally I don't remove my stitching guides because they're going to be on the inside. But in this case, I need this to stretch as I walk. And my basting stitch is not a zigzag, it's a straight stitch. So it's gonna pop no matter what. So I will remove this after I stitch my hem in place. So I'm gonna head to my iron and I'm gonna go ahead and press that 5/8 all the way around using my stitching guide. Okay, I have gone ahead and pressed all the way around. Let's head to the sewing machine and stitch this in place. I'm gonna go ahead and use a very narrow zigzag stitch or a lightning stitch if your machine has one. All right, guys, once you finish your hem, give it a good press and you are all done. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this sew along. As usual, please make sure and follow me on Instagram at Mimi G Style so I can see all of your amazing makes. Until next time, peace.